July 1944. Normandy. A narrow bocage road trembles under the distant rumble of engines. The kind German soldiers recognize instantly. Slow, heavy, unmistakably tank. But then another sound cuts through the hedgerows. A sharper growl, higher pitched, moving far too fast. Dust erupts as a U.S. tank destroyer bursts from a side lane, sliding across the road with the agility of a civilian automobile. German troops stare, stunned, their minds trying to grasp what they have just seen, because nothing on tracks was supposed to move like that. The Allied armies that landed in Normandy in June 1944 faced an opponent shaped by years of armored dominance. German forces had built their battlefield reputation on lightning-fast panzer thrusts in 1939 to 1941, sweeping across Poland, France, and deep into the Soviet Union. Their tanks, the Panzer IV, the Panther, the formidable Tiger, symbolized both engineering strength and psychological power. To many German crews, Allied armor seemed inferior, slower, less protected, and less intimidating. Shermans burned easily. British Churchills were sturdy but plodding. Nothing in the German manuals warned of an Allied vehicle that could outrun their reconnaissance cars. But while German doctrine emphasized shock through firepower and mass, the United States had spent the early war years designing a very different answer to the problem of armored warfare. Born after the devastating encounters with German panzers in 1940 and 1941, the U.S. tank destroyer doctrine imagined fast, mobile units able to counter enemy armor through speed rather than brute force. The idea was simple. Instead of using heavy, slow tanks to duel German panzers head-on, the U.S. Army would field lighter vehicles designed to outmaneuver, ambush, and exploit. By 1943, the concept had evolved into dedicated battalions equipped with specialized tank destroyers. The M10 with its open turret and 3-inch gun, the M36 with a powerful 90mm, and most dramatically, the M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the Second World War. With speeds exceeding 50 to 55 miles per hour, 80 to 88 kilometers per hour on roads, the M18 moved with a velocity no German tank could match. It traded armor for agility, relying on acceleration, sharp turns, and rapid redeployment to strike and vanish before heavier vehicles could respond. For German troops accustomed to hearing the deep, grinding engines of Shermans or Churchills, the sound of a tank destroyer's high-revving radial engine was disorienting. It signaled an entirely different kind of enemy, one they could neither predict nor easily counter. And as the Allied push expanded beyond the Normandy beaches into the dense, hedge-lined countryside, that speed would soon redefine what German soldiers thought was possible for a tracked machine. By late July 1944, the Allied foothold in Normandy had transformed into a grinding struggle through hedgerow country. The bocage, those ancient earthen embankments crowned with thick vegetation, formed endless corridors of narrow lanes that favored defenders. German anti-tank teams concealed themselves behind every bend. Machine gun nests controlled fields of fire only a few meters wide. Tanks advanced slowly, scraping against hedges, vulnerable to Panzerfausts at nearly point-blank range. In this environment, mobility was often strangled before it could matter. Then came Operation Cobra, the American breakthrough designed to shatter the German defensive line west of Saint-Lô and open France to rapid exploitation. When the bombardment fell on July 25, 1944, it pulverized entire sectors of the German front, leaving units disorganized, deafened, and struggling to reform. Through the smoke and collapsing hedgerows pushed the U.S. armored divisions, accompanied by tank destroyer battalions trained for exactly this kind of moment. Among the vehicles leading the exploitation was the M18 Hellcat, the embodiment of American mobility doctrine. Built on a lightweight chassis with torsion bar suspension and powered by a right radial aircraft engine, the Hellcat accelerated like no other armored vehicle in the war. Crews recalled the sensation of driving a sports car with a cannon. Its thin armor required careful positioning, but its speed allowed it to reposition before German gunners could adjust their aim. German units were unprepared. Their Panthers and Tigers excelled at long-range duels in open terrain, but they struggled to respond to fast-moving threats, darting between hedgerows or appearing suddenly at the flank. Reports from German field commanders during Cobra described unexpectedly rapid American armored elements that bypassed strongpoints entirely, striking command posts, artillery positions, and supply vehicles from multiple directions. It was here, in the chaos of the breakout, that German soldiers first witnessed tank destroyers behaving not like tanks at all, but like nimble automobiles weaving through a city street. The psychological effect was immediate. Uncertainty, disbelief, and a growing realization that American armor operated on a logic entirely different from the heavy steel they were used to facing. This shock set the stage for a series of encounters where speed, not armor, became the deciding force. For many German infantrymen, the first sight of an M18 Hellcat was disorienting. They were trained to expect Allied tanks to reveal themselves slowly. Shermans grinding forward, engines groaning under the weight of thick armor. But the Hellcat appeared with a startling fluidity, slipping along hedgerow lanes at speeds German soldiers would associate more with motorcycles or staff cars than tracked machines. Reports describe moments where German anti-tank teams set up ambush positions only to watch, bewildered, as a U.S. tank destroyer darted across an opening before they could shoulder their weapons. To soldiers accustomed to carefully measured armored duels, this new velocity felt almost unreal. Inside the M18, the experience was entirely different. Crews felt the constant tension of operating a vehicle that relied on speed rather than protection. They knew that a single well-placed German shell could tear through the thin armor surrounding them, yet they embraced the Hellcat's strengths. Drivers trained to use sharp acceleration to reposition quickly, while commanders learned to exploit terrain, using hedgerows and lanes as natural channels for hit-and-run tactics. The open turret exposed them to small arms fire and shrapnel, but also offered unmatched visibility, crucial for spotting German armor before being spotted themselves. Their survival depended on movement, intuition, and the courage to strike fast. American tank destroyer doctrine treated mobility not as a supporting factor, but as a primary offensive tool. A Hellcat could relocate to a new firing position in seconds, countering the slower traverse of German turrets. In the chaos of Operation Cobra, this meant the difference between being overrun and turning the tide. Hellcats struck flanks, circled heavy German tanks, and bypassed strongpoints to hit artillery from behind. German units, already destabilized by the bombardment, often mistook these rapid maneuvers for multiple armored threats, amplifying the psychological shock. These perspectives now converge toward the moment when German expectations met American speed in a decisive clash. The M18 Hellcat's speed was not an accident. It was the deliberate outcome of American engineering choices. The vehicle's lightweight hull, torsion bar suspension, and Wright R975 radial engine allowed it to accelerate in a way no German tank could match. Its top speed of over 50 miles per hour astonished even its own crews during training. German tanks, built for armor and firepower, weighed significantly more. Their transmissions strained through mud, their turrets rotated slowly, and their engines groaned under thick steel. When German soldiers saw a tracked vehicle dart across open ground or weave between hedgerows with the agility of a civilian truck, it challenged their fundamental assumptions about armored warfare. American commanders quickly recognized how tank destroyers could exploit a breakthrough. During Operation Cobra, U.S. armored divisions used Hellcats to widen breaches, chase disorganized German retreats, and secure crossroads before counterattacks could form. Their speed allowed them to reach critical positions hours before German planners expected resistance. On the German side, commanders struggled to respond. Reports from the 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr noted unexpectedly swift enemy maneuvering, forcing defensive lines to redeploy hastily. Traditional German counterattack doctrine, built around coordinated armored thrusts, became difficult to execute when American vehicles moved faster than reconnaissance reports could reach headquarters. War is shaped as much by perception as by firepower. For German soldiers who had grown up hearing that Allied tanks were inferior, witnessing an American vehicle accelerate like a car produced a moment of disbelief that carried tactical consequences. Some Panzer crews hesitated, unsure whether the fast-moving target was a light vehicle, a flanking threat, or bait for an ambush. That pause, sometimes only seconds long, gave Hellcat crews the advantage they needed. American soldiers, in turn, felt a surge of confidence when their vehicles outmaneuvered forces long regarded as the most formidable armored troops in Europe. This convergence of engineering, doctrine, and psychology now leads toward a decisive battlefield moment when German forces confronted American speed at its most lethal. By the final days of July 1944, the German front west of St. Lo was beginning to fracture. Operation Cobra's bombardment had ripped open the defensive belt, and U.S. infantry and armor were funneling rapidly through the widening gap. Dust hung over the roads like a permanent haze. Wrecked half-tracks smoldered in ditches. German units, splintered and disoriented, attempted to form new blocking lines along the narrow bocage lanes leading toward Coutances and Avranches. It was along one of these lanes, bordered by high hedgerows and shattered apple trees, that an encounter unfolded which many German survivors later described as unlike anything they had faced before. A Kampfgruppe, composed of elements from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, had moved into position to seal a crossroads. Their tanks, Panzer IVs and several Panthers, took up defensive arcs. Infantry crouched behind hedgerows, Panzerfausts ready. The terrain was ideal for a classic ambush. Slow, methodical Allied armor was expected to arrive from the east, grinding forward in the predictable cadence of heavy vehicles. Instead, shortly after midday, a sound drifted toward them, an engine note sharper and higher than the low growl of a Sherman. German tank commanders scanned the lane, expecting a scout car or perhaps a motorcycle. What emerged stunned even the most seasoned crews. An M18 Hellcat, its radial engine roaring at high RPM, shot into view at a speed no German tanker associated with tracked machines. Dust billowed behind it. The gunner in a Panzer IV swung his turret, but the Hellcat had already passed his firing arc. A hedgerow concealed it for a moment. Then the destroyer reappeared at the flank, braking sharply to take a firing position. The German crew struggled to react. Its turret required seconds to traverse that the Hellcat's driver needed only moments to exploit. A bright flash cracked through the lane. The Hellcat's 76mm gun sent a shot into the rear quarter of a Panzer IV, igniting fuel and ammunition. The explosion shook the crossroads. German infantry, startled by the sudden kill, scrambled to reposition, but the M18 was already accelerating again, disappearing behind another hedgerow. Before any counterfire could land, more tank destroyers followed, weaving between the lanes like fast-moving shadows. Their engines echoed across the bocage, making it impossible for German officers to judge the number of vehicles striking their lines. In that moment, German doctrine, built on methodical, armored engagement, collapsed under the shock of unprecedented speed. The decisive break was about to unfold. The crossroads descended into confusion. German officers shouted for their men to regroup, but the battlefield was shifting faster than commands could travel. Another Hellcat appeared on the opposite flank, emerging from a sunken farm lane at a near sprint. Its tracks clawed at the soft earth as the driver swung the vehicle into a firing hull-down position behind a rise. Dust swirled in the narrow gap between hedgerows. The turret rotated smoothly, the gunner adjusting elevation to target a Panther attempting to pivot toward the new threat. The Panther's thick frontal armor made it one of the most feared tanks in Europe, but its turret traverse was slow and its weight made rapid maneuvering nearly impossible. As the tank attempted to bring its long 75mm gun to bear, the Hellcat fired first. The shot struck the Panther low, jarring the crew and damaging its track. Immobilized, the heavy tank could only rotate its turret in a desperate attempt to defend itself. But before it could find the Hellcat again, the destroyer had already backed into cover, using its superior acceleration to vanish behind the hedgerow. Meanwhile, a second group of Hellcats swung wide through a nearby orchard, bypassing the main German defensive arc entirely. Their strategy was simple: strike the edges, confuse the response, and collapse the German line from its weakest point. One tank destroyer emerged behind a machine gun position, that was expecting an approach from the front. The German crew, shocked by the sudden appearance of a tracked vehicle, where no tank should have been able to maneuver, abandoned their gun and fled deeper into the hedgerows. Reports from the German side later noted how difficult it became to distinguish where the American armor was coming from. The enemy moved as if on wheels, one account stated, describing the rapid redeployment of the M18s. Traditional German counterattack patterns, mass armor to overwhelm a point, were rendered ineffective when American vehicles refused to stay at the point of first contact. By late afternoon, the crossroads was no longer defensible. German armored vehicles lay disabled across the lane, some destroyed by direct fire, others abandoned after their crews realized they could not reorient quickly enough to meet the shifting American threat. Infantry, cut off from coherent command, withdrew in small groups. The line that was meant to hold the western approach collapsed in hours instead of days, and behind that collapse lay a simple truth. The speed of the Hellcats had undone a doctrine built on strength and firepower. This unraveling would set the stage for the next reality the German army had to confront. What happened after such breakthroughs? When the fighting around the crossroads finally subsided, the scale of the German setback became visible. Wrecked Panthers and Panzer IVs lay smoldering in the hedgerows, some still burning from ammunition that had cooked off long after the crews abandoned them. American infantry advanced cautiously, stepping past shattered track links, ruptured hull plates, and helmets discarded in retreat. The breakthrough created by the tank destroyers had torn a seam through the German line, one that could not be quickly repaired. For U.S. forces, the immediate consequence was momentum. Armored divisions surged through the opening, pushing toward Coutances and Avranches with unprecedented speed for the Normandy campaign. Tank destroyer units, originally conceived as defensive anti-tank specialists, found themselves acting as spearhead reconnaissance and exploitation forces. Their agility let them seize bridges, road junctions, and high ground before German reserves could reorient. In the fluid days that followed, American commanders grew increasingly confident in using Hellcats not just to counter armor, but to shape the battlefield by outmaneuvering it. German reports captured the shock. Panzer Division described the American vehicles as difficult to target due to unusually rapid movements. Elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division noted how tank destroyers appeared unexpectedly behind our positions, forcing hasty withdrawals. The failures were not solely mechanical. The German defensive system relied on time, coordination, and the controlled movement of heavy armor. The Hellcats denied them all three. Casualty estimates from the fighting were uneven. German armored losses mounted quickly, while American losses remained comparatively low, though tank destroyer crews faced constant danger from artillery and small arms fire due to their thin armor and open turrets. Still, the overall effect was undeniable. The mobility of the tank destroyers magnified the impact of Operation Cobra and accelerated the collapse of German positions across western Normandy. And as the breakthrough widened, German soldiers began to reassess the enemy machines they had once dismissed as inferior. What came next would deepen that reassessment even further. In the weeks that followed the American breakout, the consequences spread far beyond a single crossroads. The collapse of German defenses in western Normandy forced a rapid withdrawal toward the Seine, creating one of the most dramatic armored pursuits of the European campaign. U.S. tank destroyer battalions, long trained for defensive anti-tank roles, now operated at the forefront of mobile warfare. Their speed allowed them to race ahead of infantry columns, cut off retreating German units, and support cavalry groups probing deep into enemy territory. German accounts from this period reflect a growing recognition that American armor operated on principles fundamentally different from their own. The Wehrmacht had built its doctrine around concentrated armored thrusts, the Schwerpunkts that relied on heavy tanks and cohesive formations. But by late summer 1944, those formations were increasingly fragmented by supply shortages, destroyed bridges, and relentless Allied air attacks. In this chaotic environment, the Hellcats thrived. Their mobility allowed them to exploit gaps faster than German command could react, often reaching villages and road junctions hours before German scouts reported American movements. Several German officers later wrote of the psychological effect caused by these rapid redeployments. One described the tank destroyers as mechanized phantoms, appearing at unexpected angles and vanishing just as quickly. Another noted that the Americans used speed as a weapon, forcing German armor into engagements where turning turrets and repositioning hulls became liabilities. For crews already strained by fuel scarcity and mechanical breakdowns, the sense of being continually outmaneuvered added to the exhaustion of retreat. For the American soldiers who operated the Hellcats, the aftermath carried mixed emotions. There was pride in the vehicle's performance, but also an acute awareness of its vulnerabilities. Many crews understood how narrow the margin between survival and destruction had been. One well-placed German shell could undo even the best maneuver. Yet the confidence gained from outmaneuvering German armor, long considered the strongest in Europe, reinforced the belief that mobility could defeat mass. These lessons would follow both armies into the final phases of the war, shaping tactics and debates that continued long after victory in Europe. And from these shifting realities emerges a broader question, one that the closing reflection must address. The story of the American tank destroyers, especially the Hellcat, is more than a tale of machines. It is a reminder of how warfare changes when assumptions collapse. German forces entered Normandy believing they understood their enemy's armor, its limits, and the rhythm it moved by. But speed rewrote the rhythm. Mobility reshaped the battlefield in ways that heavy steel could not counter. And for many German soldiers, seeing a tracked vehicle accelerate like a car forced a rare moment of reevaluation in a war defined by rigid doctrine. For the Americans who drove these machines, victory was never guaranteed. Their armor was thin. Their survival depended on judgment, nerve, and the ability to trust a vehicle that demanded constant motion. Yet in that movement lay their strength. It allowed them to strike where they were least expected and escape before the enemy could answer. History often remembers the tanks of World War II as symbols of power, weight, armor, and fire. But the Hellcat revealed another truth. Sometimes the most decisive weapon is not the strongest, but the one that arrives first, hits hardest, and refuses to be caught. In that speed, the course of battle changed, and so did the soldiers who witnessed it.